Just a quick overview of what we're going to be doing today, really fast. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about file types, so everything from RAW, JPEGs to PSDs. I'm going to talk you through some basic photo stylings in black and white and perfect effects. We're going to be talking about using actions to create quick batch edits for your images. We're going to be talking about prepping images for print, and we're going to be talking about some perfect mask stuff. So we're going to be doing a whole bunch of information. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. Now I'm inside Photoshop right now, and I've already opened up a whole bunch of images. And most of these images are PSDs or they're JPEG files. Now, these PSD files are, I've saved them in the past as PSD files. So they came off of my camera, I brought them into Photoshop, and I swapped them over to a PSD file. I size a lot of images down to make them easier to get in, to get it a little bit easier to go through a webinar. If my images are as big as they are when they come off of the camera, sometimes they take a little bit longer to load. So I like to make sure everything is nice and fast. So I size my images down a little bit, which is why most of these are PSD files. However, most of you guys are going to be working with RAW files. And I don't know that many people who work with Photoshop that don't use RAW files. So I want to very quickly start out in Bridge. And most of you guys know what Bridge is. Bridge is a program that comes alongside Photoshop, so you get it all kind of from the same place. And Bridge allows you to browse through your photos, and they're right there on your desktop. So this is basically just a mirror image of whatever is on your desktop. So all of these photos here are in my Liz's Photos folder right off of my desktop. And these are all ones that I use for videos. So a lot of these are images that I use when I record videos, both for this site and other websites. So most people that I know who use Photoshop like to use Bridge as kind of a prep program. They go through all of their images, they check for, oh, I want to use that image, I don't want to use that image. I use a star rating system, and that's typically why I like to use Bridge. Now, if you're in the program and you want to end up using a photo from here and put it in the perfect photo suite. This is, again, a straight RAW file here. And it came right off of my Canon camera. There are a couple different ways that I can do that. If you're here in Bridge, you can actually right-click on an image and go to Open With, and you'll see you have a couple different options here. So I have Photoshop CS6, Photoshop CC, and I have Photoshop Elements, so I have lots of different options here. But right down below, you'll see that you have the option of dropping this into the perfect photo suite. So you can take a RAW file and you can put it straight into the photo suite. And when you're done with it, you'll save it out onto your desktop or onto, whatever folder you want, and then you can open it in Photoshop later. You can also open this in Photoshop and go through the RAW dialog box and then put it into the photo suite. So you have two different ways of going into the suite. If you go to the perfect photo suite from Bridge, you will have access to it as a standalone program, which means that when you're using it through Photoshop, you don't have access to a program called Perfect Layers, which is kind of like our home base product, and it kind of sits there, and that's where you open up your images. You'll have a layered workflow similar to the Photoshop workflow. So if you go through the Perfect Photo Suite through Bridge like this, you'll get the whole program, including Perfect Layers, and you can edit accordingly. Now, for this image, I want to take it into Photoshop. So I'll select the top option here. And when you open up a RAW file, it's going to automatically open up your Camera Raw dialog box. And you can go in and you can make any changes in this box that you want to. So if I wanted to, do a quick lightening of this image and then add a little bit of contrast and whatever it might be, I can make some baseline changes here in this image before I put it into Photoshop. And everyone out there should know about Camera Raw. I'm suspecting if you guys are Photoshop users, you've used Camera Raw quite a bit. Now, one of the things that I always like to mention when I'm going through the Camera Raw dialog box is this little blue hyperlink down at the bottom of the screen. This tells you the file information that you are going to basically be copying over and creating in Photoshop. One of the many great parts about working with raw files is that you can never overwrite your original raw file. When I open this into Photoshop, it'll say the file name will technically still say CR2, which is the Canon RAW file type name. However, when I go to save it, it will not save over that raw file. It will automatically open up the Save As dialog box because you can't save over your original raw file. And this hyperlink allows you to select what type of file you'd like to bring into Photoshop. So this is very important. And this just depends on your workflow. So these are the options that I have selected right now. I keep my color space and my bit depth a little bit smaller for webinars because I don't need my images to be huge while I'm showing them to you guys. But you can change all of your workflow options here inside the Camera Raw dialog box. And this is really important, really important before you save your image and before you bring it into the photo suite. You want to make sure that you know what your file is going to be, what size it is, what bit depth, what color space, and all that fun stuff. So we'll go ahead and click OK. If I'm done inside the Camera Raw dialog box, I can click on Open Image. It'll go through and it'll open my photo into the program. Now, with a raw file, let's go ahead and let's open up this image inside Perfect Effects. And we're going to do something super basic to this photo. I'm barely going to talk about Perfect Effects. I really just want to talk to you about file type here. Now, there are two different ways that you can get to the suite. On the right-hand side of my screen, you'll see that I've got the ON1 software panel that popped up. If you don't see that, just go up to your window menu, go down to extensions and check the ON1 box or ON1 option. If you uncheck it, the ON1 window will disappear. So just in case you don't see it, it's right under extensions under the window menu. It'll pop up and you get all your options. You can also go through the File menu and go down to Automate. And there's a difference between those two menus, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and open up Perfect Effects. And it'll put us into the program. Now here inside Perfect Effects, on the left-hand side of the screen, I can go to my effects library, and I can add any type of layer that I want. So for this image, I'm going to open up the vintage category here. I want to add some sort of kind of old school film styling to this photo. So I'll click on the Holga color option. This is this like super high contrast, high saturated look, and it's got this really cool like film style vignette around the edge. And then once I'm done inside the program, I'm just going to go ahead and click Apply. And we'll talk a little bit more about Perfect Effects in just a bit, so don't worry about it. This is just kind of the preliminary stuff. So once I add an effect inside Perfect Effects, you'll see on the right-hand side of my screen, in Perfect Layers, it's added the Perfect Effects layer on top of my background layer. So I can turn that layer on and off. I can actually go in and lower the opacity of this layer. If I go through and I keep editing my image and I think it's a little too harsh, now I have access to using a layer mask here if for whatever reason I really like this, but then all of a sudden I realize I don't like it on the eyes and I want to undo that effect. I can add a layer mask to this layer. So when you add Perfect Effects stylings, it will add them all as a layer so that you will have access to it inside your layered workflow here in Photoshop. Now, once I'm done with this image, let's say this is all I wanted to do. If I go up to the File menu and I choose Save, it will automatically open up this dialog box. So for here, I can type in my new file name. So we'll call it, the cat's name is Eddie. So we'll call him Eddie Edit 1. And I can select my file type from this menu. So we'll call it a Photoshop file right up at the top. And then I can make any other changes that I want to. Now, it automatically saves it into the same menu or the same folder that I had opened this file from, which is really great. So it's going to save into that Photos for Videos folder that I have. And once I go ahead and click on Save, I'll go ahead and you'll notice right up at the top of my screen, it's changed the file name from the, image 10652, and it's swapped it over to my new PSD file. My original raw file is still in Bridge. I don't have to worry about it being destroyed for whatever reason. And if I scroll down, here's my brand new Edit 1 PSD file. So working with raw files is really, really, really useful. You can never destroy your original. It always places layered workflows on top of your background image, so you don't have to worry about destroying the background image as well here inside Photoshop. And you're always able to delete any of our layers that you don't like. So if you're using a PSD file or a JPEG file, if you're using JPEGs and you apply some sort of effect on top of your background layer, when you go to save the image, it will also open the Save As dialog box. And the reason why it does that is because JPEGs do not give you access to a layered workflow. So just in case you guys are out there shooting JPEGs and you come in here and you add a Perfect Effects layer and then you add a new background and then you mask out your foreground. It will automatically ask you to save this as a PSD file. So if you're shooting JPEGs, you never have to worry about adding layers on there and then having it save over your JPEG image. You'll always have your original, and then you will always have your saved multi-layered PSD or TIFF file. Now let's go ahead and let's get into some slightly more difficult editing here, or slightly more complicated editing. So I'm going to take this image into Perfect Effects. So I'm going to go over to the right-hand side of my screen, and I'm just going to double-click on Perfect Effects. And it'll open us up into the program. Dun, 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 dun. Now, with this image, I haven't really done anything to this image. You can see I still have dust spots on there that I haven't taken out. This image is pretty flat, and it's straight out of camera. There's really nothing to it. There are a couple different options that you can use inside the program to pump up this image. And on the left-hand side in the effects library, you've got a couple categories here that are good places to start. The first couple categories I usually suggest are all kind of combined together: brightness, color correction, and contrast. And these are kind of the three things I like to do first before I add vintage effects or landscape effects or photo filters or whatever it may be. So I'll open up the brightness category. And let's go in and let's just select the lighter option. I want to lighten up the photo a little bit. Now, one of the cool things about using a whole bunch of the effects on the left-hand side is they open up this pane on the right-hand side, the Effect Options dialog box. And over here, you'll see that this lighter layer, all it did was up the brightness by about 50%. Now, what's cool about this Effect Options pane is I can edit this a little bit more if I want to. So I can reduce the brightness if it's a little too bright. I could take my shadow slider and I could pump up some of the shadows, which are the mountains and the lake down at the bottom. I could add a little bit of local contrast here if I want to pump up that kind of mid-tone contrast, and so on. So I can come in and I can actually customize this layer depending on what I'm doing with this image. So the effect options pane is really, really useful when it does actually pop up. Some effects on the left-hand side are pre-packaged, so you're not going to be able to have access to this pane the way that I have access to it right now. Some are just presets that we create that you can't go in and customize. But this lighter layer, I know from using it before, pops up this effect options pane, and it's really, really, really useful. So once we've kind of corrected the exposure and the contrast a little bit, the next thing we want to do is we want to add some sort of enhancing layer on top of this. So inside the effects stack on the right-hand side of your screen, inside Perfect Effects, this effects stack is very similar to a layered stack. It's just based here inside Perfect Effects. So I can click on the Add button and add an empty layer here. And now I can go over to the left-hand side of my screen in my effects library and I can add another layer if I want to. So I could open up the landscape category and I could take a look at some of these landscape presets. Now, one of the things next to each one of these categories on the left-hand side in the effects library is you'll see that there's this little icon that's kind of like a grid with a play button. And if I click on that, it opens up my full screen browser. And this is our quick view browser, and this allows you to go through and find the presets that you're looking for without having to stare at all of that excess information. This is your full screen view of all of those different presets. So I can scroll through and I can find one that I really like. So you'll see we've got Magic Forest there and Magic Ocean. We've got Magic Sunset. We've got a couple that look like warm toners here, which could be really useful depending on the image. So it just depends on what I want to do. So for this photo, I'm going to go down and I'm going to choose, let's go ahead and let's choose Magic Desert. You don't have to use the exact landscape preset for the type of landscape that you're using. Sometimes I really like the Magic Sunset look just because it warms up the whole photo. For this image, it won't work, but for some images, it can work really, really well. So don't feel, strapped down depending on the landscape that you're actually editing. Sometimes another one actually works really, really well. So that's the Magic Desert preset. And I really, really like that on the image. However, I want to do something a little different on the bottom part of my photo. It's still really dark and it seems to have lost a lot of oomph. And I want to brighten up this whole bottom part of my image, and I want to go in and I want to add a little bit more vibrance, I guess. So we have a whole bunch of specialty masking tools in this program that help make selective editing a little bit easier. So let's go ahead and let's add another layer here. And let's go in and let's, on the left-hand side, we will find some sort of effect that will work. So let me scroll up a little bit and we're going to go back to the brightness category here. And I'm going to go back up and I'm going to add another lighter effect. I'll click on lighter one more time. Now, when I add this lighter effect again, you'll see that it's lightening the bottom part of the image, but it's a little too harsh on the top part of the image. Now, there are a couple tools that I can use to create a mask. The first tool is called the Masking Bug tool, and the Masking Bug is a specifically sized mask that you can add to your image, whether it be rectangular or round. So if I click on my image, it pops this bug in here, and I can resize it using the little arms on the left and right-hand side. Now, anything that the grid is over, the layer is not being affected. The image is being left alone. So anything underneath that grid is not being added, the lightening filter is not being added to it, and anywhere where the grid is not, the image is getting lightened. Now, using these masking bugs can be really, really helpful when you have an image that has a pretty straight horizon line. So this image has a pretty straight across horizon line there, and I can just click and drag that over that horizon line. And now the top part of my image is still darker, and the bottom part of my image is getting a little bit lighter. Now, once I've added this, I can make any changes to this masking bug if I want to. So for instance, if you are editing an image and you want to reduce the feathering amount a little bit, you can just go up to your tool options bar and you can change things like the feathering amount. So I'm actually going to reduce that by quite a bit. I don't really need it to be feathered. And I can go in and I can change the opacity. So if I do want the background to be just a little bit lighter, I can lower the opacity of the entire mask, which is really cool. So it just depends on what you want to do. But this masking bug is really useful if you have an image where you need to cut something in half, or you want to add a specialized vignette, which seems to be pretty popular these days. So this masking bug can be really useful. Now, we've added this bug, but you'll notice that it didn't add any lightness to the mountains here. It left it really, really dark. So the top part of my image on my mask is completely black, and the bottom part of my image is completely light. And I want to be able to change that. So we also have a masking brush tool. And the masking brush tool has access to our perfect brush, or our edge detection brush. And the perfect brush is a brush that goes in and it pays attention to color-based information underneath the crosshair of your brush, and it only paints out that information, or paints in, depending on what you want to do. Now, I'm going to make my brush just a little bit smaller, and I'm going to reduce the feathering amount. Now, the keyboard shortcuts for the brush tool here inside Perfect Effects and all the other programs is the same as inside Photoshop. So your left and right bracket keys make your brush bigger and smaller. And if you hold the Shift key and then the left and right bracket keys, that edits your feathering amount around the edge of your brush. So same keyboard shortcuts here inside the program as inside Photoshop, which is one of the many plus sides of working with these two programs together. Now I'm just going to make sure that in my tool options bar, I want to change my mode over to paint in. I want to paint the effect in on the mountain. And once I have that selected, I'll just click and drag. And with the perfect brush, it's not lightening the background at all because I've got that center of the brush over the mountain and not over the sky. So it's selecting that mountain coloring and it's leaving everything else alone. Now, because I have the perfect brush selected, you'll see that I'm also going around a whole bunch of these trees. I don't want to lighten those bushes or those trees around the bottom of the mountain. I want to leave them a little bit darker so that I've got a higher level of contrast here. And then I'm just going to kind of click and drag and make sure that I get all of this area down here at the bottom of the mountain. And there we go. Now, really quickly, just because you guys are Photoshop people and you'll probably appreciate this, on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you have this after drop-down menu, and this allows you to show the mask that you've just created. So if I go up and I choose whatever type of mask I want to look at, so I usually choose mask red, this can show me my mask and it can let me refine it a little bit more. So if I want to go in and I want to add all of these little mountain areas, and I want to get into some of these smaller areas, if I want to start lightening up the trees a little bit, I can do that. You also have access to going over and changing your paint in mode to paint out. If you click on the X button on your keyboard, that swaps between paint in and out, and that can be really helpful when you're creating masks because you can go in and be a little bit more specific, and you can swap back and forth a lot quicker if you're trying to make a really perfect mask. So it just depends on what you want to do. So you have lots of different options for using these masks. It just depends on the type of masking that you're actually doing. And I like to look at my actual mask. I like to make sure that it looks good and that it's doing what I want it to do. But some people don't prefer to look at the mask. They just like to look at their after image. It always seems to depend on the person. All right, so now we've taken a layer and we've customized it using the two different masking tools. And we've got our before image and our after image. And now our photo is starting to look a little bit more pulled together. The last thing that I want to do is I want to add a little bit more vibrance into the mountain and the bottom part of the image. It is a little dull. Now, another thing that's really cool about using Perfect Effects is you can copy your masks over and reuse them. So I just created this mask and I want to reuse it again. So if I go up to the mask menu in the top left-hand corner and I choose copy mask, now when I add a new layer and a new effect, I can paste that mask down. So let's go ahead and let's go to the color correction category here. And I want to go down and we're just going to select the increase color option here. And once I have that selected, the sky is now this weird Technicolor. I don't want that. I'm just going to go to my mask menu and choose paste mask. And now I reuse the exact same mask that I was using earlier. And one of the other cool things is it opened up another effect options pane. It opened up the color enhancer layer. So you'll see that it's upped the saturation by quite a bit, and I can keep upping that even more if I really want the bottom to start to look a little bit more saturated and vibrant down there. I can also change things like temperature and tint as well. So if I want to cool it down just a little bit or warm it up a little bit, I can go in and I can edit this color enhancer layer. So that's always really cool when you have access to those. Now, once I'm done with all this, the last thing I want to do is I want to save this as a preset. So I'll go up to my preset menu and save preset. And this is kind of a way for you to save your work. So we can call this Oklahoma landscape preset. I can place it in a category. I have tons of different categories that I use. I've got a landscape presets category, portraits, vintage film, wedding, and so on. I like to separate everything down into presets or into categories because it makes editing and my presets go a lot faster because I know where to find stuff. I can type in a creator and a description if I want to. And once I click create, it pops over into my presets library on the left-hand side. Now, inside the presets library on the left-hand side, if I open up category 1, scroll down a little bit, and there is Oklahoma landscape preset. Now, really quick note about the presets is they don't save your masks. You have to recreate those for every photo because every image is going to be a little bit different. So if you want to reuse a preset, you're going to have to go back in and you're going to have to reapply a mask depending on the image. Now let's go ahead and let's click apply. It'll do all of its magic and it'll pop us back into Perfect Effects. And now you'll see it's combined all of these layers and merged them together into one Perfect Effects layer. And I have my original image, and then I have my Perfect Effects after. And the difference is pretty staggering, especially with this image where the original photo is so flat and so dull and so dark. And then our after image has a lot more oomph to it. We were able to separate the bottom and the top of the image so that we could really, really increase the brightness and the vibrancy on the bottom while making sure that the sky was still nice and dark. And that was really easy with those two masking tools. So there we go. Now, let's go ahead and let's move on to Perfect Black and White. I want to talk to you a little bit about black and white. And I'm going to go a little bit faster than I did in Perfect Effects because I want to talk to you about creating actions. So let's go ahead and let's open up, let's see, which image was I looking for? There we go. So I have 3 different portrait images here that were taken all kind of on the same day or on the same afternoon, I think. And I want to add the same black and white filter to all 3 of these. There's a very, very easy way to do that. And you can open up the program and you can add, an effect to each one and try and get them all to look the same. But with the help of presets and actions, it can make this a lot easier. And that was the difference between the File Automate menu and the panel on the right-hand side that I was talking about earlier. That's going to be your main difference, is that one of them allows you to record actions and the other does not. So here inside Photoshop, I've got my Actions panel opened up, and you'll see I have an On1 folder. And these are actions that I've created that work with On1. So to record an action, I'm going to open up that folder, and I'm going to click on the New Action icon down at the bottom of my screen. And we'll give it a name. We'll call this Black and White Portrait Preset Action. And I'll click Record. Now, once I'm recording this action, I want to go up to the File menu, go down to Automate, and choose Perfect Black and White from there. You do not want to go through the panel when you're recording an action. You only want to go through the File Automate menu. And then it'll open up the Perfect Photo Suite and open up Perfect Black and White. Now here inside Black and White, on the left-hand side of my screen, I have an effects library here, and I can go through all of these different effects if I want to. So we have tons of categories, just depends on what you're looking for. We've got a 19th century processes category, which is really fun, and you can add a whole bunch of old kind of vintage film stylings. We have a Hollywood portrait section, which does really, really well with portraits. One of my favorites are the Ingrid presets, and they have this soft Hollywood glow to them, which is really nice. I'm going to choose this Ambrose preset and click once to apply it. Now, if I don't like a preset, unlike Perfect Effects, this is a one-layered workflow. So you can't combine multiple presets together because it's black and white. That doesn't really make sense. So you have to choose whichever preset you really like. So if I don't like this preset for whatever reason, I can just click and select another one, and I can use that one instead. So it just depends on what you're doing and what you're looking for, but you can usually find a black and white preset on the left-hand side. Now, once I've added this preset, on the right-hand side, I can make any adjustments using a whole bunch of different panes. So we have your basics, we've got your tone pane, so I can add things like contrast, and I could increase or decrease brightness a little bit. I could increase the black point or the white point. I can add a little bit more detail to the image if I want to kind of pump up some of the curls on the right-hand side, or I want to make sure that she's got a lot of detail on her eyes. We have the color response pane here, which allows you to lighten and darken specific color channels. So the original image is still technically in color, and I can go in and I can lighten and darken any of these color channels. So now I'm lightening all the reds or darkening all the reds, and you'll see it's affecting her her skin, it's affecting her hair, it's affecting a whole bunch of the flowers that she has in her hair up there. And I can do the same with all of these different color channels here. Now, underneath, we've got a whole bunch of other paints that you can use, including the film grain paint if you want to add film grain. You can add a toner like this image here. This is a specialized custom calotype toner, which calotype glass negatives were an old type of film styling that you used to be able to do, and you actually put emulsion on glass and then exposed it, and it was really cool. And it's really hard to reproduce nowadays because you have to use all these toxic chemicals. So right here on the right-hand side, once I'm done making all of these different changes, I want to go up to the preset menu and I want to save this as a preset. And we'll call this customized calotype preset. And I will place it in a category. So let's pop it in portrait presets. And I will type in my creator name and a description if I want to. And then it'll save over into my presets library on the left-hand side. So we'll open up portrait presets and there's customized calotype preset that we just created. And you'll see I've got another one down here called Liz's Carbon Print Neutral. I like to take a lot of the prepackaged effects and I change them just a little bit to fit what I want. Now, once I'm done and I click apply, the reason why I kind of sped through that is because we were recording an action and it's going to put us back into Photoshop. And we want to make sure that we stop our action, which is right down at the bottom of the actions panel. So I'll just click on the stop button. And now I have my brand new perfect black and white action that I just recorded. Now let's go over to another image from the same shoot. And I will go and select my action here. So it was the black and white portrait preset action. Once I have it selected, I'll click on the play button. And it's going to go through all of the options. It's going to open up perfect black and white. It's going to add all of its magic and apply the effect. And then it's going to put me straight back into Photoshop. Super, super, super fast. And then I have two different images, basically from the same shoot, that I wanted to look a little bit more unified. And I can do this with multiple different files. I can bulk action a couple different files, which is really cool. So if I wanted to, I could go in and I could export all of these images with a specific action if I wanted to. I could automate and batch process. So if you go down to the automate menu and you choose batch, you can select your black and white portrait preset action, which is the one we just created, and you can go to the source menu and choose opened files, and this will apply the action on every single open file that you have inside Photoshop. So this is a really great way to source out your images and batch them very, very quickly. So all you need to do is just record an action. Now, one of the things that's important is if you use any masking in any of like your Perfect Effects programs or your black and white program for whatever reason, it won't record those masks. It's only going to record the options that you had inside black and white and effects, like the different layers inside effects and all of the different options you may have added in black and white. So it won't save the masks, but it'll save all that other information. And then once I click OK, it'll apply that effect to all of those different open files. Now, another really cool thing is if you have an image open and you want to apply a preset of yours, on the right-hand side in the ON1 software panel, I'll open up Perfect Black and White. And when I just click on Perfect Black and White once, all I need to do is go down. These are all of the different preset categories that you will have seen inside Perfect Black and White. And right down here is my Portrait Presets category. So I'll just click once. And here you'll see Customize Calotype preset. Here's my Carbon Print Neutral preset. I've got a specialized preset that's based on an iPhone app. So I have tons of different presets in here that I use. And depending on which one I want, I just double click and it'll apply that preset for me. So it's going to open this photo into black and white really fast. It's going to prep the image. It's going to add the preset, do all of its amazing magic, and it's going to pop me back into Photoshop. So actions work in kind of a one-stop shop. You apply them. You can't change any of the options inside Perfect Black and White or Perfect Effects or whatever program you're doing all of that bulk actioning in. It just applies this all in one flat layer and then it brings you back into Photoshop. Now, just in case you don't like any of the changes that you've made in any of these programs, you just select your layer. So I have my layer on the right-hand side of my screen inside Photoshop. I have my perfect black and white layer selected. If I don't like it and I want to start from scratch, I just delete that layer, and now I've got my original photo back. So we never overwrite your background image or whatever layer you're working on. We always create a duplicate for you so that we don't destroy that original information. Now let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit about Perfect Mask. And the reason why I want to talk to you about Perfect Mask through Photoshop and why this is so cool is because this program can be so useful when you use Photoshop. And I want to show you a little bit as to why. So this photo here, all I want to do is, let's just say I don't want to add a different background. All I want to do is I want to separate the foreground and the background. And I want to be able to reuse the layer mask that I create. This is something that I use all the time. I actually just used this. I had a photo shoot, a fashion photo shoot that I did, and I needed to be able to add a whole bunch of specialized effects to the girl in the image, and I needed to be able to drop out the background and darken it quite a bit and add this kind of like haloing effect. And I wasn't able to do that in Photoshop, and I tried for a while. And so I brought it into Perfect Mask and I separated the foreground and the background, and I was able to edit both them separately. So this is a style of action that I use constantly in my personal work, and I always recommend this. So I've got my image selected, and we'll go to Perfect Mask. We'll open up the program. Now, once inside Perfect Mask, before I start removing anything, I want to go over to the right-hand side and introduce you to this panel here. It's called Adjust Mask. If you go to the Apply As drop-down menu, this allows you to select how you'd like to apply the mask that you create. And what I always like to do is I like to create a copied layer with a layer mask. And I'll show you why I select that when we pop back into Photoshop, but this is my favorite option here. Now, once I'm done with that option, I want to go in and I want to remove the background here. There are a couple different tools we're going to use today. And the first one is called the Drop Brush tool. And this is the one that most people like to start with. And up in the tool options bar, these are the options that you're going to want to play with when you use the Drop Brush. The first option is called the segment size, and this is the most important. The segment size refers to the type of color sample and how large the color sample this tool is removing. So Perfect Mask is based on color segmentation. It's not based on edge detection. It's not based on tonal information. It's based on color. So this image has been segmented down into color information, and that's what it's looking for. That's what it's removing. Now, if your segment size is really, really, really high, so let's pull it up like really high. If you click on your image, we're going to click over here in the sky. It's going to do a really good job of removing this background because it's gone through and it recognized that most of those colors are similar colors. Now let's drop the segment size down to like 2 or 3. And let's do the same thing on the right-hand side. I'm just going to click right here. You'll notice that it's being a lot more specific about which tones it's removing. It didn't remove that darker cloud tone. It didn't remove the lighter cloud tones down here. It only removed that very small sliver of kind of like warm, mid-neutral gray. So the segment size is one of the most important parts about using this program. With that dropped segment size, if I click and drag over the exact same area I had just clicked and dragged on, it's only going to remove that tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. So if you're having problems in Perfect Mask, if you want to be a little bit more specific inside Perfect Mask, this segment size option here is one of the most important. The higher it is, the larger color sample it's going to remove. So if I make it really high and I click and drag along this background again, it's going to do a good job of removing the bulk of that background. So just a quick note about using that segment size option here in your tool options bar when you have the drop brush selected. I always end up getting questions about it, and I always feel bad not explaining or at least not showing it because I know that sometimes it can be a little confusing. Now we've removed the bulk of the background, but I want to talk to you about another brush that you have access to before we remove it all completely. and that is the Magic Brush tool. Now, one of the things that the drop brush does is it's a continuous brush. It looks at your image, and you'll notice that when it removed the left-hand side, it didn't remove the right-hand side because there's no way to get over there. There's all this hair in the way. So I don't want to have to go in and zoom into my image and individually take a little tiny drop brush and paint in between all of those different hair tendrils. So if I go up and I choose my Magic Brush tool, this is a great way to remove some of that excess color information. So I'm just going to click out where the clouds are, where that cloud information is, and I'll click out and drag through my hair, and you'll notice that it's removing all of that background information and it's leaving all of her hair information alone. And I can drag this across the whole left and right of the image because the background is a pretty similar tone. And it's doing a pretty good job of removing all of that for me. So we'll get up really close to her face, and we'll go in and we'll remove all that background. Now, the only thing I need to do is kind of clean up the bottom here. So I'll choose my drop brush one more time, make it a little bit bigger, and we'll just kind of click and drag to remove some of these chunkier parts of the background. And then I can make my brush nice and small, and I can go in and I can kind of do a little bit of a little wiggle through the part behind her back. And there we go. Now, one of the tools that we don't really need with this image, but I want to talk to you a little bit about before we exit is the Refine Brush tool. And the Refine Brush tool is the one that I usually use on the edges of hair. Now, that Magic Brush tool does a great job of removing a very large portion of the background through difficult areas. However, the Refine brush I like to use to kind of refine some of the edges a little bit. Her hair did get a tad soft when I dragged that Magic Brush through. And the Refine brush can help bring back some of that information. And it looks at the edges of areas like hair, clothing, trees and horizon lines, and it tries to pay attention to some of those hard edges. So this does base itself on color information, but it also pays a little bit more attention to the edges in your image. And all you do is just take this and you click and drag it around parts of your image. And because we already removed the bulk of the background, it's not going to do that much, but you just click and drag it around parts of your photo that you want to make sure that you refine the edges, and it'll remove the background while leaving everything else alone. Again, I already removed the background, so this tool isn't actually doing anything because I've already done all of the work. But I like to point this tool out because it's a really, really great tool. If you have an area that is a little complicated, that Magic Brush just isn't really working, try out the Refine brush. It does a really, really great job of honing in detail while removing the background. Now, once I'm done in this program and I click Apply, it's going to go into Photoshop, and you'll see it copied my original background layer onto a brand new layer, and it applied this in a perfect mask, or into a mask. So now I can go in and I can select my mask. So, I can select just her, and I could copy her to another layer. Or I could create a new adjustment layer, and I can use this mask. So if I want to darken her just a little bit, I want to just darken her. I don't want to darken the background. And it's doing a great job of separating it because I've already created a mask that I can reuse pretty consistently. So we darkened her a little bit. I can select that mask again, and let's say I want to edit the color balance. I want to cool her down just a little bit. I think she's too warm. I can go in and do that, and the background is being left alone completely. So the reason why, whoops, we don't want to change her that much. That's kind of weird. So the reason why I always copy with a layer mask in that Apply As drop-down menu that I showed you right at the beginning is because I don't remove my background in any way. I copy my background over so I don't destroy my original image, and then I have a mask that I can reuse throughout the program. And you can invert this mask. You can edit it from here if you want to. Let's say I want to go in and now I want to remove her skin and I just want to affect her hair, or I want to go in and I want to remove her shirt because I don't like what it's doing to the purple shirt that she's wearing. Whatever it may be, this mask is reusable and re-editable. That's one of the best parts about working with Perfect Mask in Photoshop. And I use this, I cannot stress how often I use this in my personal work. And it really, it doesn't depend on the type of imagery. I use this all the time. I used it yesterday. I used it last week. I used it a couple of months ago with a couple of professional shoots. I've used it with product photography. I've used it with portrait photography. I've used it with landscape photography. I've used it with everything. And Photoshop is my preferred workflow, and Perfect Mask is kind of my little side tool that I use as often as I can when I really, really need it. And whether you're replacing backgrounds or whether you just want to create a reusable mask like I just did, this program is super, super useful. Now, the last thing that I want to talk to you about is printing. And I want to talk to you a little bit about printing. Let's actually open up an image that we actually edited. Here we go. So we have this photo and I want to now print it. I'm going to save this image. I want to save this as a new image. Let's save it as portraits. It's one of my portrait images that I use in preset. So I'll call it Portrait 4 Black and White. And I'll save this as a brand new file. So now I have my original image. I have my black and white file. Now I want to resize it. If you are like me, and I hope that you all are like me, Perfect Resize is a pixel resampling tool. So what it does is it goes into your image and it resamples and reapplies pixels to help recreate a larger version of your original file. When you upsize an image without resampling, if you upsize an image without resampling, your image is going to look like horrible. It's not going to look very good. Pixel resampling done right is the best way to upsize your images. Now, because we're going to resample all of the pixels and reconfigure them around the image, if I do that with this black and white file, I won't be able to go back to my smaller original file version. So what I like to do is duplicate my file over. If you go to the image menu in Photoshop and you click on duplicate, you're just going to duplicate this image. So this is going to be Portrait 4 Black and White resized. And this is my personal workflow, and I recommend this when you're going to be doing a lot of printing. And oops, I clicked on, there we go. So what I like to do is I like to make sure that I have access to my original black and white file and my resized black and white file. Let's just say that, I decide that when I upsize it, I don't like it 20 by 30 inches. I want to go back to my original file. With the upsized version, I don't really want to have to make that a smaller image. It's a big file type. I want to be able to delete it. I want to be able to go back to my original image without the excessive resampling. So if you're going to be using Perfect Resize, particularly through Photoshop, I always recommend that you duplicate your file over and create a resized version. And that's just a little tidbit from me from many, many years of printing experience. And I really promise that it will save a lot of your information. Now for this image, once I've got it duplicated over, now we'll open it up into Perfect Resize. We'll talk very quickly about Perfect Resize because I do want to get to your questions. It looks like there are quite a few that are coming through and I can't answer them while I'm talking, so I want to come back to those. So here inside Perfect Resize, on the right-hand side of my screen, these are the two most important panes that you want to pay attention to. Your pixel dimensions, so my width and height of this image is 2000 by 3000 pixels. And then my document size pane, and this tells me how large I can basically print my image at and what the resolution is. So at a great resolution of 300, which is great for printing, I can go up and I can see what width and height I can print this image out at. Now there are a couple different ways that we can resize. This image is not very big. I want to upsize it by quite a bit. So I want to go in and let's say I want to print this 30, the height of 30, and then whatever the width may be. Inside my document size pane, so long as constrain proportions is checked, you want to make sure your proportions stay specific. All I'm going to do is type in a brand new height. So I'm going to type in 30, and it will automatically resize my image to 20 by 30. You'll notice that the pixel dimensions have changed. Now it's 6,000 by 9,000, and then at 300% magnification. So this is our brand new file size, so it's gotten quite a bit bigger. And these are my new pixel dimensions and my new width and height. Now, another way that you can resize, let's go ahead and reset that, and we'll start again from scratch. Another way you can resize is by using the crop tool or the preset drop-down menu, and they work in exactly the same way. In the preset drop-down menu, I can go down and you'll notice that there are a couple different options here for sizes. So if you need to print your image out a specified size for paper or frames or canvases or whatever it may be, we've got a whole bunch of basic sizes. Now, the photographic sizes are paper sizes that you'll probably recognize, so 8 by 10, 16 by 20, 20 by 24. We have specified paper sizes as well, so if you print on 17 by 22 paper like I do, I use this option a lot because it's a great size. It's nice and big, but not too big. So let's say I want to resize this to 17 by 22. I'll click to select that option. And then what it does is it adds a crop box on top of your image if you have to crop your photo down. This is not the correct ratio image for a 17 by 22. I will have to chop off the top and the bottom. So I can click and drag my crop box into place, and anywhere that is inside this crop box will be 17 by 22. And then once I'm done, I can add a little bit of sharpening in here if I would like to. There's a sharpening pane that I can turn on to prep my image for print. And then once I click apply, it'll put me back into Photoshop with my new resized image. Now, let me reset this one more time. And the last thing I want to show is the library on the left-hand side. And these are pre-packaged presets that come based on printer type and paper type. So depending on what you like to do, I'm an Epson printer kind of a person, and I like to print on matte paper. So I always go to the Epson matte category. And when you open it up, there are all of these pre-made sizes. So I could select 16 by 20, which you can see I used because I favorited it. And I'll click on that. It'll add my crop box. And then it also adds a baseline amount of sharpening that's specific to Epson printers and matte paper. So it went in and it added an unsharp mask for me. And it specified the amount and the radius. So I didn't have to do anything. It added some prepackaged sharpening here.